Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're part of the Hidden Front History Channel, and our whole mission here is to uncover these true stories from World War II.
The ones that really get lost, right? The ones that fall between the cracks of the big battles and the grand strategies.
Exactly. And today, our mission is, well, it's really focused. We are diving deep into a single, pretty extraordinary source.
Yeah.
It's a transcript that details this pivotal moment of, I guess you'd call it, psychological warfare.
But not on a battlefield. This involves a group of young German women, prisoners of war.
Right.
It's a really remarkable piece of human testimony. We're unpacking the experience of 150 German women POWs. They were Wehrmacht auxiliaries, the Helferinnen, as they were known.
And what did that mean exactly? What were their roles?
Well, they were the women who really held the system together behind the lines. We're talking about secretaries, radio operators, nurses, and they were young, almost all of them in their early 20s.
And they find themselves, of all places, at Camp Clinton, Mississippi in late 1945.
Right after the war. And the entire story, the thing we really need to get our heads around, is this core paradox.
Okay, let's set that up. Because these women, they had been conditioned by years, and I mean years, of Nazi propaganda to expect the absolute worst from the Americans.
Unimaginable brutality. They were expecting torture, rape, a slow execution. They arrived completely prepared for the end of their lives.
But that's not what happened.
Not even close. Instead of cruelty, they were met with this consistent, almost overwhelming act of kindness.
And it was devastating. That's the word the source uses, and that's what we need to tap into. This kindness wasn't just a relief.
No, it was a weapon. It was psychologically devastating because it shattered their entire ideological framework. It did more damage to their beliefs than any interrogation or punishment ever could have.
It's this idea that they were forced to confront not just that they lost the war, but that they had been fundamentally totally lied to about the very nature of their enemy.
Exactly. This wasn't physical trauma. This was a trauma of morality, a trauma of the soul.
It's that cognitive dissonance, isn't it? The realization that the people you were taught to hate, the people you were told were demons, were the first people to treat you like a human being in years.
And that realization, it just dismantles your loyalty. Brutality could never do that. Brutality reinforces it. Kindness dismantles it.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to set the scene properly.
Yeah.
It's December 1945. Let's get into the dramatic, immediate details of their arrival.
Okay, so picture this. You have 150 German women. They are exhausted, utterly defeated, and they are basically collapsing in a frozen field outside Camp Clinton in Mississippi.
And the weather is a huge part of this. The source is very specific.
It is. It describes the cold not just as a low temperature, but as a wet bone deep freeze.
That's such a powerful phrase.
It is because it's not the dry, sharp winter they would have known in Germany. This is a damp cold that gets inside your body, inside your bones, and it just strips away any last little bit of hope you might have.
And they just come off this miserable journey. 3 days.
3 days from New Orleans, stuck in unheated boxcars. And then the train just dies. It's stuck in the snow. So they are weak, they are freezing, and they are absolutely terrified.
Their uniforms, the gray-green Helferinnen outfits, they were thin and worn out.
Offered zero protection, just cloth against this wind and snow. The source mentions many had broken boots, so their feet were soaked and freezing. Some women had even resorted to wrapping torn blankets around their feet.
Just to have some kind of buffer.
Any buffer at all against the icy ground.
And on top of all of that, there's the hunger.
Of course. No proper meal in at least 2 days. So their physical reserves are at zero, which means their mental and emotional capacity to deal with this crisis is also completely depleted.
They're just waiting.
They are essentially waiting for death to arrive. They have no other frame of reference for what comes next.
So when those train doors finally screech open, that's when the real despair sets in.
It's complete. They see American guards waiting outside, just silhouettes against the swirling snow. They're shouting orders in English, a language most of the women don't understand.
But the meaning is clear.
The immediate message is clear. Move! Get out! Now!
And right away, the propaganda kicks in. Those warnings from their officers start running through their minds.
Yes, and when the first women, who are just too weak and frozen to stand, fall hard onto the icy ground, everyone braces for it.
They expect a rifle butt to the ribs, a kick, a stream of shouts.
They expect dehumanizing punishment. That's what they've been told will happen, but that is precisely what doesn't happen.
The guards don't rush them.
They don't shout abuse. They don't strike anyone who falls. They just wait. They maintain this distant, professional silence. And for the women, this is strangely terrifying.
Okay, explain that. Why is the lack of violence more terrifying than the violence itself?
Because violence would have confirmed everything. It would have made sense in their
It
worldview.
would have proven the propaganda right.
Exactly. The lies they were told, that the Americans were savage animals, that they'd be killed slowly. If a guard had struck them, it would have been awful, but it would have been expected.
But the lack of savagery means everything is unpredictable.
They have no framework for it. They can't interpret professional restraint from an enemy they've been told has none.
And you see this through the eyes of one woman in particular, Maria, a former secretary from Hamburg.
Yes, she crystallizes this internal panic. She truly believed, based on those warnings from her officers, that this was the end. She thought, they brought us here to die in the snow.
Her mind literally couldn't compute any other possibility.
It just shows you how efficient the Nazi propaganda machine was. It didn't just teach hatred, it taught a very specific apocalyptic expectation of what would happen if they lost.
So they stumble towards these wooden buildings, what they assume is the camp. Every step on their frozen feet is agony, and yet the guards are just patient.
This uncanny, terrifying patience. And they're finally led into the first building, some kind of processing area, and the warmth just hits them.
The source says several women audibly gasped.
Well, of course, the heat, just basic warm air, must have felt like a miracle after that bone-deep freeze. But that feeling of relief, it lasts for about a second.
Because then their ingrained fear kicks in again. They look around the room and they see tables.
Tables covered with tools that look clinical.
Scissors, razors, bottles of liquid, some surgical-looking instruments, medical equipment.
And the panic is instant. All those wartime rumors just come flooding back. Horrific stories about experiments on prisoners.
And Maria thinks, this is it.
They didn't bring us here to freeze. They brought us here for medical torture. They're projecting the unimaginable cruelty of their own collapsing regime onto their captors.
So they are absolutely terrified. They are about to be experimented on.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
The next command comes not as a shout, but as the first truly human contact they've had. An American nurse comes forward. She's described as middle-aged, with kind eyes and a gentle smile.
And she's not speaking German.
No, she's using slow English and very patient hand gestures. She points.
She points to showers, to clean towels, to soap.
And the women are just utterly confused. They thought they were being led to a dissection table, and instead they're being told to wash.
It's another prisoner, Greta, a former nurse herself, who processes it first.
She whispers it, almost in disbelief. They want us to wash. It's an act so normal, so mundane, it just doesn't fit the scale of their terror. Why would your torturers care if you were clean?
But the details of the washing, that's what really makes this moment land. They are filthy, exhausted, they're stripped of these frozen uniforms.
And when that hot water comes on, the source says several women cried out, not from pain.
From the shock of the warmth.
The first hot water they had felt in months, maybe the first moment their bodies felt truly physically safe since the war ended.
And you mentioned the soap. We have to talk about the soap.
We do, because it's a crucial sensory detail. This wasn't the soap they were used to. Wartime soap in Germany was harsh, gritty. It smelled like chemicals.
This is different.
The source describes it as soft and rich, and it smelled clean like flowers. It was a small thing, but it was the first aesthetic, non-essential kindness they had received. It spoke volumes.
It's the difference between just fulfilling a basic requirement, cleanliness for health, and offering genuine human consideration, the quality of life.
Absolutely, and it continues. When they emerge from the showers, they aren't handed rough prison stripes. They're given new, simple, but warm dresses and sweaters.
This is active restorative care.
It is the ultimate subversion of propaganda. That wall of hatred they'd built up, it hasn't just cracked. It's been completely undermined by a clean towel and a bar of floral-scented soap.
That shower, that moment of temporary physical relief and just total confusion, it was only the setup.
It was only the prelude. The main event was still to come. The moment that truly shattered their world, the food.
As they're led to the next building, the mess hall, they're hit with what the source calls the smell of salvation.
And you can just imagine how overwhelming that sensory experience must have been.
You can almost smell it reading the transcript. It's real food. Meat cooking, bread baking, vegetables boiling in a rich broth. For Maria, who's been surviving on thin potato soup and rock-hard bread for weeks.
Her stomach must have just seized up with a hunger so desperate it was painful.
They enter the mess hall. It's warm, it's large, it's well lit, and there are American soldiers in there eating.
And this is a crucial detail. The soldiers move aside. They make space for the German women. It's not segregation, it's just a simple act of courtesy, of sharing a space, another small signal of respect.
And then the meal itself arrives. A cook starts ladling soup into bowls, and the description here is so important.
Yes. This wasn't the thin, watery, calorie minimal soup they had endured for years in Germany. This was thick soup.
The source specifies chunks of beef, carrots, potatoes, onions. A real nourishing caloric meal.
And alongside it, 2 thick slices of white bread. Not the dark sawdust-filled bread of wartime Germany, but soft white bread. And it's spread with real butter.
Not the foul-tasting coal oil substitute they were used to. Real butter. And a cup of steaming hot coffee. This was not a prisoner's meal. This was a meal for healing people.
Maria even notes the actual weight of the tray in her hands. It felt heavy with substance. But they don't eat.
Right. Instead of just attacking the food, which you'd expect, what happens?
They sit almost paralyzed. They just stare at the trays, the sheer abundance of it, the quality of it. It freezes them. Their brains just cannot reconcile the reality with what they had been braced for.
They anticipated starvation, and they received a feast.
And then the psychological breakdown is triggered by the simplest action. One woman finally raises her spoon, she tastes the soup, and she just starts to cry.
And then, as the source says, it was like a dam breaking.
Every single woman in that mess hall began to eat and weep at the same time. Just this overwhelming, chaotic release of emotion.
Maria savors the bread. She describes the taste as like heaven.
And she has this realization. This was food meant to sustain people, to keep them healthy and vibrant, not just barely alive. In that moment, they're literally consuming the lie they had been fed about their enemy. And it tastes like beef stew and fresh butter.
So how did a simple bowl of soup become a psychological weapon?
Because it wasn't about the food itself, it was the unbearable weight of unearned compassion. If they had been treated with hatred and brutality, it would have validated their past, their sacrifices, their entire worldview.
But this goodness, it invalidated everything.
Everything. It forced them in that moment to mourn the deception of their own nation, to mourn the loss of their dignity, the years they wasted on a lie.
It's the revelation that the people they were told were inhuman were displaying this profound humanity. And that fact was more traumatizing than any threat could have been.
And the soldiers watching are just baffled. You get this incredibly poignant image from the source of a young American soldier whispering to his friend, "Why are they crying? It's just soup."
He's right on one level.
He's physically correct, but he's completely oblivious to the seismic internal shift that's taking place inside those women.
And the immediate aftermath just reinforces the message. They're led from the meth hall to their barracks. They're given warm coats.
And the barracks themselves, they are clean, ordered, and they offer a level of comfort that is just shocking to them.
Maria writes about it, doesn't she? The luxury of the beds.
The luxury, yes.
Yeah.
Clean white sheets, 2 thick wool blankets, and a pillow. A pillow. She compares this to sleeping on bombed-out floors and in damp cellars. This wasn't just safe, it was restorative.
And the internal debate, the confusion, it starts immediately.
It does. Greta, the former nurse, says to Maria, "I do not understand. We are the enemy. We should be punished." There's still that part of her that wants the old moral order to make sense.
But Maria's response is the start of her transformation.
It is. She asks back, if they fed us and kept us warm, what does that make them? And, maybe more importantly, what does that make us? Her conclusion is that the safety they felt was more terrifying than any threat of violence.
Because violence would have been explicable.
Exactly. Safety, kindness, that required a complete moral overhaul.
So that initial shock, the soup, it eventually settles into a routine.
Yeah.
But the routine itself, the consistency and predictability of it, starts to cement this new reality.
It becomes the next layer of psychological pressure.
Right. Life in Camp Clinton was structured. The bell rang at 6:00 a.m., signaling breakfast.
And breakfast was another education in American abundance. Scrambled eggs, toast with real jam, milk, hot coffee. They weren't just being fed, they were being actively nourished back to health.
And their work duties were simple, non-punitive. Maria describes working in the laundry, washing American uniforms in a warm, steamy room.
Others worked in the kitchens and the gardens. The women who had medical training were put to work in the camp hospital. The labor was productive. It treated them like contributing human beings, not like slaves.
And crucially, they were paid.
Compensated, yes. It was a few dollars a week in camp script, but it was something. They could go to the canteen and buy small luxuries for themselves. Chocolate, cigarettes, writing paper.
That little bit of economic freedom, of agency, the ability to choose a treat for yourself, it must have done so much to chip away at that image of the monolithic, evil American enemy.
Without a doubt. And the physical transformation was immediate and dramatic.
They gained weight.
Rapidly. Their faces, which had been hollow and aged, started to fill out. Their skin regained its color, its health. Their own bodies were telling the story of survival and comfort that stood in stark contrast to their ideological past.
But just as their bodies start to heal, their minds are dealt this crushing blow.
Yes. About 6 weeks in, this is January 1946, the mail starts to arrive. Maria gets her first letter from her mother back in Hamburg.
And the contrast that a single piece of paper provides it's just devastating. Maria's sitting there in a warm barracks, she's physically flourishing, and she opens this letter and it's a window straight into the ruin they left behind.
Her mother describes a city that's still just a rubble, living in a damp basement, always cold. And the specifics of the food scarcity are just horrifying. Her mother writes about eating potato peels and thin, watery turnip soup.
And the details about her family, they must have pierced Maria's conscience like a knife.
Oh, absolutely. Her brother, Carl, standing in line for hours in the freezing cold for a single loaf of bread, and often coming home with nothing.
And the part about her sister?
Her younger sister, Emma, fainting from hunger at school.
And now you have to hold that image in your head. Emma fainting from hunger. And contrast it with Maria's reality that very same evening.
She's served a tray with beef stew, thick with meat, fresh bread with butter, a slice of sweet apple pie, and hot chocolate.
That single meal had more calories and more quality nutrition than her entire family might see in a week.
And the guilt just becomes overwhelming. It's not an abstract concept. Maria describes it as physical weight.
It was physical. The source says that women who got these letters would often literally put their spoons down. They were physically unable to eat another bite.
Because their survival, their comfort, which was coming from the generosity of the enemy, it felt like a profound moral betrayal of their starving families back home.
Greta, who had gotten a similar letter from Berlin, she says it out loud, right?
It does. She voices the conflict. People are dying of cold and hunger in the streets of Germany, and we sit here warm and fed in the enemy's camp. That tension, that guilt must have been unbearable.
It forces this moral pivot. Their loyalty was supposed to be to Germany, to their shared suffering, but now their suffering has been relieved by the enemy, while Germany itself continues to starve.
They began to realize the true betrayal wasn't by them. It was by the state, by the leaders who dragged them into this war and then left their people to starve in the ruins.
The kindness gave them the psychological distance they needed to finally start criticizing their former loyalties. They started asking the hard questions.
Right. If the Americans are treating us, the enemy, what did our own leaders know about the reality of the war and the suffering they were causing everyone?
So the camp routine provided the structure, and the letters from home provided the moral reckoning.
But it was the daily, utterly mundane, small acts of human kindness that really chipped away at the specific foundational lies they had been taught.
Yeah, the source is clear that not all the guards were friendly. Most were just professional doing their jobs. But there were these specific anecdotes that stood out because they just completely defy the caricature of the enemy.
We have to talk about Sergeant Miller.
Yes, Sergeant Miller.
He supervised the laundry detail where Maria worked. He's described as a tall man, maybe in his 40s, with a slow, deliberate Southern accent.
And his big gesture at first was just simple respect.
It was. Every morning, he'd start their shift by saying, "Good morning, ladies. Not prisoners, not get to work. Ladies."
Yeah.
It was persistent, it was respectful, and it treated them as people, not just units of labor.
But the real game changer happened in late January, and it was something completely outside the official military structure.
He comes into the laundry with a box of fresh oranges. He tells them his wife sent them from Florida, and he just had too many for just me. He offered them, not as charity, but as a casual gesture of sharing.
And for Maria, this was just astonishing. She hadn't seen fresh fruit in years.
And when she bites into it, the sensory experience is so potent. The sweetness, the sharp citrus flavor that she says she closed her eyes and it was like tasting happiness.
What a phrase. That tells you everything about the level of deprivation they had experienced.
But the real insight for her was the realization that this man, Sergeant Miller, was demonstrating ordinary human kindness to an enemy prisoner. It was domestic, it was non-military decency, and it made the ingrained hatred they felt for the American animals feel completely ridiculous.
It humanizes the enemy instantly. He's not the faceless war machine anymore. He's a man whose wife sends him fruit from Florida.
It destroys the propaganda in a single taste.
And there's another pivotal moment, this one in the English class the camp provided.
Yes, with a young American volunteer named Miss Peterson. She was apparently very patient and encouraging.
And there was a shy girl named Anna who was struggling with the language. She gets frustrated and calls herself stupid in German.
And Miss Peterson, she doesn't speak much German, but she understands the meaning, the despair, so she intervenes. She touches Anna's hand, this small gesture of physical comfort, and says firmly, "No, you are not stupid. You are brave. Learning a new language is brave."
And you have to think about the weight of that simple compliment.
It's immense.
Anna arrived feeling like a defeated enemy with zero value.
Yeah.
A person who had failed her country, failed her ideology, and now the enemy, this volunteer, is telling her she's brave.
It transforms her self-perception. In that moment, she's not a worthless failure. She's someone with inherent value.
And it was this accumulation of decency, right? A cook giving extra portions, a soldier good-naturedly trying to teach them baseball. These small moments proved so much more effective than cruelty.
And this is the core insight from the source. This consistent, basic human decency was more devastating than any cruelty could have been.
Because if the Americans had been cruel, it would have just confirmed their old beliefs.
It would have confirmed their former loyalties, reinforced their hatred, made them martyrs in their own minds. But since the Americans were kind, it forced them into a crisis of loyalty.
If the people we were taught to hate are capable of this, what does that say about the war we just fought? What does that say about the leaders we followed?
Maria really grappled with this agonizing conflict. Her country had led them into a disastrous war and left them in ruins. Meanwhile, the enemy was providing warmth, food, and genuine care. She had to somehow reconcile her loyalty to a failed ideal with the overwhelming humanity she was receiving.
The kindness itself was forcing this painful ideological reckoning.
And that reckoning was accelerated and cemented by two major external events. First, the chance to see American civilian life. And second, the mandatory confrontation with the horrors of the concentration camps.
Okay, let's start with the first one. In May 1946, they organized these supervised outings.
Yes, trips to nearby towns, including Jackson, Mississippi. And this was an intentional act by the American command. They wanted to expose the prisoners to the reality of the society they had been fighting.
And the source calls it the shock of prosperity.
It was absolute and immediate. As they're driving toward Jackson, Maria is just looking at the landscape. No bombed-out factories, no collapsed bridges, no piles of rubble where houses used to be.
A normal town.
Functioning, vibrant centers of civilian life. And the specifics were just staggering to them. They saw stores stacked floor to ceiling with canned goods, fresh meat, colorful clothing.
And cars.
Dozens of personal automobiles. Cars were everywhere. Private cars, not just military vehicles. They were as common as bicycles, which was just unimaginable in resource-starved post-war Germany. And the people looked well-fed, well-dressed, relaxed.
And Maria immediately contrasts this with Hamburg, which was still a nightmare of destruction.
Yeah.
People living in cellars, scavenging for food. The disparity was just staggering.
And the conclusion she and Greta drew was just devastating for their old beliefs. It is like a different world, Greta said. And then Maria has the ideological breakthrough. We chose the wrong side.
And it wasn't just about military victory. It was about the systems themselves.
Exactly. Maria realized that the American system, democracy, capitalism, individual freedom was incredibly robust. It was strong enough to fight a massive global war and, at the same time, maintain a flourishing, abundant society for its citizens.
The very strength of their enemy was rooted in a concept they had been taught was weak and decadent democracy.
It proved that everything the Nazi regime had told them about the weakness of the West was a fundamental lie. And that lie was exposed by the sheer overwhelming abundance of stuff in a store in Jackson, Mississippi.
So the first truth was that the enemy was kind. The second truth was that the enemy was overwhelmingly powerful and prosperous.
And the final unbearable truth arrived in June of 1946.
This is when Sergeant Miller gathers the women.
Yes. And he announces they are required to watch a film. This film was documentation of what the Allies found when they liberated the concentration camps. Footage from Auschwitz, Dachau, Belsen.
The purpose was uncompromising. To force them to confront the systematic, industrialized horror that Germany had committed in their name.
And the reaction was visceral. The images of skeletal bodies, the mass graves, the gas chambers, it caused immense shock, crying. The source says some women physically vomited or fainted.
And Maria has this terrible realization that while she was doing her job as a secretary, believing she was helping Germany, this evil was happening at the same time.
This was the moment of complete ideological transformation. The shame went beyond military defeat. It became a moral contamination.
And her realization, it gets right to the core of personal responsibility in an authoritarian state.
She says, we should have asked questions. Our ignorance is not innocence. We chose not to see. They finally understood that through their obedience, their silence, they were part of the system that made this evil possible.
And it put all that American kindness into a new perspective.
Yes. They realized the Americans were kind because they upheld a belief in human dignity, but they hadn't forgotten the systematic evil that had been committed. The kindness was being delivered by people who understood the full gravity of the crimes.
Maria's diary entry that night, it synthesizes her entire experience at Camp Clinton.
She writes that the Americans are kind because they believe in human dignity, even for people like us, but they do not forget. In that moment, she shed the last remnants of the nationalist lie and accepted the agonizing burden of truth.
So by late 1946, rumors of repatriation start to spread. And you'd think they'd be overjoyed.
But they weren't. They were terrified. They were healthy now, well-fed, physically restored, but they were terrified of going back.
Afraid of the physical ruins and the scarcity, of course, but also of the psychological conflict.
They feared they had changed too much. How could you possibly explain that the enemy had shown more humanity and provided more care than your own government? This new truth they carried was a kind of ideological secret that would just alienate them from their suffering families and neighbors.
The journey back must have been somber. They land in Bremerhaven, Germany, in February 1947.
And Maria sees immediate confirmation of her fears. The port is heavily damaged. Hamburg is even worse. Entire neighborhoods are just gone, replaced by rubble. And the people, they looked thin, haunted, utterly defeated.
When she gets home, her mother barely recognizes her.
Yes, and the source notes her mother's reaction was tinged with what might have been resentment at how healthy Maria looked, how vibrant and well-fed she was compared to the starving population around her.
And this begins what the source calls the silence of survival.
Maria finds a job as a secretary in a British occupation office, but she rarely, if ever, speaks about her time in America.
Right.
Because the people who had stayed and suffered, they couldn't afford to hear about the kindness of the enemy while they were still so focused on just bare survival. Her truth was too disruptive to their ongoing trauma.
So she carried the burden of what she learned at Camp Clinton. She had seen the alternative. She had seen the prosperity of democracy and the value it placed on human dignity, even for a defeated enemy.
And years later, after Germany had rebuilt, she finally shared her story with her own children. And her son, maybe reflecting that new national desire to just forget the embarrassing defeat, asked her why she kept reminding them of it.
And her reply really summarizes the profound, transformative lesson of her whole experience.
She tells him, "You need to understand what can happen when people believe lies. When they follow leaders who tell them what they want to hear instead of the truth, when they stop asking questions and just obey."
The conclusion is that Camp Clinton gave her more than just physical survival. It gave her a moral education.
It proved that human dignity matters, that political systems matter, and that democracy, with all its flaws, was fundamentally better than dictatorship. She was saved not just by food, but by knowledge acquired through compassion.
So this entire incredible story, it really hinges on the immense psychological power of a single, simple gesture.
The hot, thick soup served to freezing, terrified German women in Mississippi. It was so much more than sustenance. It was a symbol of compassion, a direct challenge to hatred, and a revelation that just destroyed years of propaganda in an instant.
It forced a total reevaluation of who was good and who was evil, who was strong and who was failing. The Americans, just by following basic professional standards in the Geneva Convention, provided a kind of moral blueprint for the future.
I think our final takeaway from this deep dive, and it's drawn directly from Maria's ultimate lesson, is this. The best way to defeat an enemy that's steeped in ideological hatred is not always through destruction. It's to show them a system that is morally superior.
A system based on human dignity and truth. A system that maintains its moral standards even in victory.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought for you, the listener, as you reflect on Maria's journey. Her ideological transformation really hinged on that painful realization that her ignorance is not innocence. She chose not to see the horrors being committed by her own government.
We have infinitely more information available to us today than Maria did in 1945. We are saturated with news, analysis, conflicting viewpoints.
And yet, we still see people gravitating toward comfortable lies. We see them following leaders who validate what they want to hear, rather than confronting uncomfortable truths.
So we'll leave you with this question. What burden does that choice, the modern choice to maintain a convenient ignorance, place on us today? And if the Camp Clinton story teaches us anything, it's that systems matter.
Which modern systems or institutions do you see best promoting human dignity consistently, even for those people you fundamentally disagree with? That's the lesson that truly spans generations.
Thank you for joining us on this essential deep dive into a hidden front of history.
We'll see you next time.